Hello all. This presentation will talk over the importance of penetration tests, its process, procedures, and protocols. Some snapshots and video clips of industry open source pen testing tools, uh, risk assessment analysis, management of scan results, leading to a constructive information assurance for decision making. The first thing that I want to talk about is the significance of the penetration testing. Penetration testing is a proactive approach to identifying and addressing vulnerabilities in an organization's infrastructure. This can be uncovering hidden system vulnerabilities, assess network security, strengthen security process and strategies, lower remediation costs and reduce dwell time, adhere to regulatory compliance, preserve brand reputation, and serve as a fire drill for any organizations. Handling failures in following penetration testing procedures could include identify the cause of that failure, prioritize the risk, use the right tools, improve your reporting methods, and learn and take note of that failure. Here is a guide to attacking Metasploitable 2 virtual machine. On this slide, I am presenting a 5-step procedure in how I plan to conduct and organize my attack process on my target. The first step that I will do is to review the current configuration of my lab environment and modify the configuration of that Metasploitable VM to match with what's on my configuration on my network. The first thing that I want to verify in my lab environment is to confirm that my VMnet1 host only subnet address remains the same. The second step is identifying the target, which I will use my Kali Linux box and run netdiscover in the virtual environment to list all the active IP addresses in my lab environment. The third step will be performing a recon of the target. I will be scanning with Nmap, Necto, OWASP, and Nessus, which are all available in my Kali box. The fourth step will be each of the scanning results will be presented with vulnerability screenshots or video clips to list and compare their results to decide which would be the best weakness that would be ideal for attack. And the last step would be to conduct the attack. I will initially be using Metasploit framework, but will resort to other tools as Burp Suite or Netcat and others as needed. Nmap, Necto, OWASP, and Nessus are all the tools that can be used to perform vulnerability scanning on the Metasploitable 2 virtual machine, and these are the tools that is shown on the slide. However, they differ in their approach and focus. Nmap can be used to identify open ports, services, and vulnerabilities on the Metasploitable 2. It has scripting engine that can be used to automate tasks and perform vulnerability detection. Necto is a web server scanner that can be used to scan the web server on the target for dangerous files, CGIs, outdated server software, and other problems. OWASP provides guidelines and resources for improving application security. You can use the OWASP as a starting point for identifying potential vulnerabilities in the web applications running in the target. Nessus is a vulnerability scanner that can be used to identify potential flaws in the target. Nessus can identify software flaws, missing patches, malware, denial of service vulnerabilities, default passwords, and misconfiguration errors, among other potential flaws. For the risk assessment workflow, I am following the methodology of system modeling principle to understand the architecture of my target which is the Metasploitable 2. In my enumeration, the IP address of the target is 192.168.164.154. As a result of the net discover, while the Nmap scan results identified several open network services, including FTP port 21, SSH port 22, and HTTP port 80. These port vulnerabilities are also identified from other scanning tools that I've used, such as the Necto, OWASP, and Nessus. In the assessment of vulnerabilities and knowing these open network services, I can conduct remote code execution, SQL injection, or cross-site scripting as an attack vector on the target machine. And the third step will be conducting the penetration test using the Metasploit framework. My risk evaluation is the factors that should be considered for the identified risk includes the likelihood of exploit and the potential impact of a successful exploit. In developing a mitigation plan based on the results of the target assessment, it is recommended to add a restriction policy on the firewall. And the firewall that I'm going to be using is the pfSense because that is what is configured on my lab environment to harden the complexity of those ports. On this slide is a gap analysis of the FTP port 21, SSH port 22, and HTTP port 80 as the weaknesses I have chosen to exploit in conducting the penetration testing because these ports can create another tunnel for elevation of access. As an example, I used the exploit workflow of the FTP port 21 to gain access to the root system and create another account. To address this gap, it is important to properly configure and secure these ports, enable encryption for sensitive data, deploy firewall, ensure updates and patches are continuously applied, implement access control, deploy IDPs, and a real-time monitoring. As a recommended mitigation, by implementing the firewall restriction to limit access to FTP port 21, port 22, and port 80, the expected outcome is to reduce the attack surface and improve the overall security of the system. This can help prevent unauthorized access and protect against various types of attacks. In terms of cost, implementing a firewall restriction is generally a low-cost measure that can be done with minimal resources. Most operating systems and network devices comes with built-in firewall capabilities that can be configured to restrict access to specific ports. In terms of the criticality, restricting access to these ports can be considered a critical security measure. FTP, SSH, and HTTP are commonly used protocols that can provide attackers with a way to gain access to the system if not properly secured. And this can be seen on my video. In terms of experience, implementing a firewall restriction should be done as soon as possible to reduce the risk of attack. It's important to regularly review and update firewall rules to ensure that they are still effective in protecting the system. The screenshot on this slide reflects the rules that was implemented in the pfSense firewall to block traffic and limit access of the identified ports. By implementing firewall restrictions to limit access to these ports, the expected outcome is to reduce the attack surface and improve the overall security of the system. This can help prevent unauthorized access and protect against various types of attacks. This slide attaches the report document from my Nmap, Necto, and Nessus first and second scanning. I was expecting that the firewall that I created for these ports would completely remove the vulnerability, but it turns out that it just lessens the accesses of these ports from my firewall, which means there are other measures that I need to be covering to completely harden the system. The OWASP report was not included because I couldn't figure out how to export the report at the time I was conducting the pen testing. On this slide, I present a lesson learned and conclusion of my experience in conducting the penetration testing using the tools such as Nmap, Necto, OWASP, and Nessus to identify the vulnerabilities in the network and the web application so that they can be fixed before they can be exploited by attackers. In conclusion, by implementing these countermeasures, organizations can reduce their attack surface and make it more difficult for attackers to exploit vulnerabilities. This can help reduce risk and harden system against attack. Hardening a system involves implementing measures to reduce its attack surface and make it more difficult for attackers to exploit vulnerabilities. This is an important step in improving the security posture of an organization and reducing the risk of cyber attacks. This is the end of my presentation, and this slide presents some of the major references for this video screencast. Thank you for watching.